Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of Power Core Productions and Podcastings. I am your host, Jerron Harrington, back to hit you another video. And today, we are going to be continuing the series of What If Issei Was the Shield Hero, Highschool DxD X Devil of the Shield, Season 2, Part 1, Dragon's Rage. Before we get into today's video, as always, I want to say thank you to everyone who supports Power Core Productions and Podcastings. I cannot do it without you guys. You make the channel grow, you make the core grow, as we are on the road to 2K and beyond. Also, I want to say thank you to everyone who has supported the initial beginnings of this series. When I first came up with it, I wasn't really too sure how many people were going to like it or going to want it to keep going. But seeing the reactions that it's been getting and seeing how many people have been enjoying it so far, I think that it warranted going further with Season 2. So we are going to be covering Season 2 of Highschool DxD in this version of the events of the story. So I do hope that you will look forward to the new adventures and everything else that we'll be having going on along the way. Also, make sure you check out last week's uploads in case you haven't, so that you can stay caught up on everything that is Power Core Productions and Podcastings. And make sure you check out all of Season 1 of What If Issei Was the Shield Hero, Highschool DxD, Devil of the Shield, as all 3 parts are currently available. But anyway, without further ado, we're going to get into today's story. So, as always, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. For Issei, he found himself reliving a dream. The same dream that he had been dreaming of for some period of time. His fight with Riser had long since passed, but yet, the images, the thrill of it all, that still rang true in his mind, almost as clearly as the day that it happened. However, this dream always took the same turn. He found himself stuck in a darkness as a spiraling heat and flame consumed him. All that he could hear were the screams of his comrades, of his friends, of his family. And it ended the same way every time. He would gaze upon the body of Rias Gremory, lying cold and lifeless at his feet, as the sounds of a taunting laugh echoed all around him. He could feel the darkness quelling within his heart, the rage that built from within, the emotions that he hid under the surface. In his dreams, he could not escape them. Issei would quickly awaken to find that nothing that he had dreamt of had come to pass. He was at home like he always was. And most notably, he was in bed with Rias. Not that anything ever happened though, but still, it was definitely a nice sight to wake up to in the morning. Issei's alarm clock would go off, signaling that it was time for him to get to training. Not that he thought that there was really much that he could do in the meantime, though he knew that there was much work that needed to be done. In the time since the fight with Riser, Issei had become a lot more adept with his powers and abilities. The shield always seeming to surprise him at every which turn, learning to do new things that he never thought that he could, and gaining more experience along the way. Even still though, the power used from the shield itself had major drawbacks. For one, Rias had to remove the seal placed on his powers, the seal that was used to lock away the cursed energy, as she deemed it was too dangerous for him. Although seeing what he had done as the alternative, well, she had no choice. Issei had sold 25% of his soul, using the blood sacrifice, just to gain some of that power. Rias couldn't allow for his entire soul to be corrupted. However, she would monitor him very closely. All the same, Issei didn't feel all that much different, although he did feel like there was something about him that had changed. He wasn't sure of what it was exactly, but he can only liken it to the feeling of not having a complete soul. But to sell some of it to the dragon that was imbued within you, it couldn't have been that much different. No different than paying an arm or a leg in the grand scheme of things. While the seal had been removed, Issei was warned to be careful when using the Wrath Shield, to not draw upon the power carelessly. All the while, though, the pain from having committed the blood sacrifice was definitely starting to take its toll upon him. Even in class, with Motohama and Matsuda constantly pestering him about the many charming women that had now come into his life, even Kiryu was also getting involved in the taunting. But Issei couldn't really focus or pay attention. Asuya could see that Issei was in pain, and she asked what troubled him. He would tell her that he needed to go see Akeno, because he could feel it coming within him. He would go to the Occult Research Club where Akeno would be summoned. This was a process they had had to do numerous times. The cursed power would overwhelm Issei's body and it needed to be released. Otherwise, too much buildup could result in something rather catastrophic. Although the process in and of itself was something that Issei definitely enjoyed for the most part. Ever since he had committed the ritual, there had been a tattoo, if you will, that lying on his chest, just above where his heart was. This was the symbol of the Black Dragon, or the Dragon's Mark. As Issei lay on the couch, he had been ordered to remove his shirt. He already knew what was coming, but still, every time it was always something rather magical about the ceremony. Akeno would arrive as well, dressed in her silk robe. As she sat on top of him, she would lay her hand upon his chest. Issei could feel the energy slowly being siphoned away, but that wasn't really on his mind, as her silk robes were, well, all that she had at the moment. And this was something that, for Issei himself, was definitely a passion. In fact, in all the time that he had spent with the girls at the Occult Research Club, he had come to learn much about them. How they acted, how they functioned, their characteristics, their behaviors. For Akeno, it was always a form of teasing, if you will. And for him, he was so dense that he could never tell when the teasing ended and where the admiration began. But deep inside, Akeno had a great fondness for Issei. Seeing how desperately he fought to save Rias, seeing his valor and his determination against Riser. What girl wouldn't be attracted to such a thing? Although, sadly, it seemed as though Issei had a hard time with his confidence. For Issei himself, he never really thought that he was the type of person who was worthy of the attention that he got. It wasn't that he was going to turn it down. No, not at all. Beautiful women left and right throwing themselves at him? What man would be stupid enough to do that? But at the same time, there was always a linger of doubt. There was always a hint of worry. Issei hid it well enough so that no one could ever really tell, but it was definitely something that always bothered him. Was he truly deserving of everything that he had gotten? What had he done to be the shield hero? To have this power? To have the people interested in him the way that they were? Up until A couple of months ago, he was a nobody, a loser on the fast track to nowhere. And yet somehow by chance, he found himself in this life. A life that, honestly, he had never asked for, but one that, now that he had lived it, he couldn't see himself living anything else. All the same, the process would come to an end, and Issei would thank Akeno for her help. She would tell him that it was really no problem, and Issei would bid her a farewell as he went back to class for the rest of the day. When the day came to an end, everyone would meet at Issei's home. The Occult Research Club was being under maintenance for spring cleaning at the moment, and so everyone had to find a new place to meet in the meantime, and Issei's home was most suitable. They had gone over the tallies for the month for how many contracts had been made. For Akeno, she had the most at 11, followed by Koneko at 10, Kiba at 8, Issei had bumped up to 4, and Asya had 3. For Issei's massive development, it mainly came in the form of him using his shield as a way of service to the people who asked for it. Some people wanted protection. Other people, well, the shield came useful in different aspects of life. It was all about how creative Issei could be with it, and as such, he was rewarded kindly. His most notable clientele was the shopkeeper. Since Issei would escort him to and from home at night, to make sure that robbers or anything like that didn't bother him, the crime around his shop had gone down tenfold. In fact, criminals had become a lot more wary of coming near the shop at all. And more so, Issei had been doing a good job. As it came to an end though, Issei's mother would yet again prove to be an embarrassment for him. As the club finished up their activities, his mother would start to unveil his baby photos to everyone. Issei starting to feel even more self-conscious about it all, as all of the girls swooned and looked around at baby Issei, learning of where his young perversions had began. Even Kiba was getting in on the fun until there was one photo that caught his eye. A photo of particular interest, and one that Issei hadn't really thought about for a while. The photo was that of him and another child that he used to hang out with. Some kid that always wanted to go to church, like all the time. It was really annoying. As they looked, Kiba would take note of not just the child, but of the sword that was in the background. Issei didn't really think much of it, but Kiba remarked that it was a holy sword, finding it rather peculiar that of all the people who could have come into contact with it, that it would be Issei. Later on that night, Issei would go out to fulfill a contract that he had been assigned. He had gotten a call from some guy that lived in a rather fancier part of town. Of course, he had no idea what he was getting himself into, but it wasn't too far of a walk, and thankfully, he had a new skill that he wanted to try out. Issei would arrive to the condo, and he would be greeted by an older man in a black kimono, with black and yellow hair. The man would tell Issei to come inside, and the two would sit on the couch, each one enjoying a drink as they made small talk and conversation. Issei learning that the guy wasn't really all that half bad. He seemed like some rich guy that was just lonely and didn't have anyone to talk to. Although he did seem to have a massive collection of various things. When the conversation came to an end, the man asked Issei what he wanted as compensation, and Issei said whatever seemed fair for a fairly decent talk. After all, there wasn't any need to give up a soul or anything like that. No, it was always about fair pricing. And the man decided to give Issei a fancy painting that he had hanging on the wall. He thought that it really didn't do very much for him, and it was definitely worth something. A nice price. Issei would gladly take the painting and wish his client a good night, although he was told that they would keep in contact again. Issei would exit out of the condo area. He was preparing to use his new technique to get home. However, at that moment, he would get a call on his phone. It would be from Rias. She had called with concern, as a situation had come up and she required his presence. For Issei, this was no problem. And in fact, now was as good a time as any to try out his technique on the next level. He would tell Rias to hold her hand up in the air, the right one. Rias would do so, and her hand would begin to glow, as a small green magical circle would appear in the palm. The circle would float into the air, and a portal would be created. On the other side, Issei would jump out immediately, landing on the ground as he thankfully kept the painting on his side so that it didn't break. Everyone would be shocked by this, wondering how Issei had just done that. And Issei would quickly explain to them how he and Rias had accidentally discovered a new shield, one that he never expected to have. This shield was known as the Portal Shield, although how he had obtained it was kind of a funny story. It all started in the very beginning, when Issei first met the group. They had sent him out to go on his first assignment, and when they tried to use the teleportation spell, it didn't work. Now at first it was just assumed that Issei's magic wasn't strong enough, and so he couldn't make the jump on his own. And that was half true. The other truth was that the moment that Issei had attempted to pass through the spell circle, the teleportation spell actually got jammed inside of the shield itself. Kind of like getting its own scan, the spell remained dormant, and as such, it unlocked the Portal Shield. The Portal Shield was basically a shield that worked like any of the other ones. Its look was that of a green magical circle, and it could function in the form of defense. But there was also another benefit. For Issei, as long as he had the Portal Shield in hand, he could create smaller little green magic circles. If he placed them on anyone or anything, using the Portal Shield, he could teleport there. Essentially, the shield was like a beacon, and the smaller circles that he could form and place on any other object would be like a calling signal to the beacon, and thus Issei could form a portal to that location and get there. You could say, for reference to another show that's rather famous for this technique, the Portal Shield and its technique is a lot similar to one that is known as the Flying Raijin Mark. Rias was impressed, and she was happy to see that Issei was definitely getting stronger. A skill like this could definitely prove to be useful in the future. Once they had all gotten together, Rias would explain the situation at hand. They had been summoned together to take care of a stray devil that had been hiding in the abandoned building just up ahead. Thankfully, they arrived in time before it could do anything, and so their goal was to take it down. But since they didn't want to drag out the fight any more than necessary, Rias would give everyone the assignment. Kiba, Issei, and Koneko would go inside to draw the devil out, while she and Akeno would await to take it down, with Asuya staying close to Rias as support. Everyone nodded in understanding, but Kiba would be a bit behind, as if something was distracting him. Thankfully, he got his head cleared, and the three of them would walk inside together. They would take note of their surroundings as it was rather dark, before a spider-like devil on the ceiling would make itself known. Kiba would zone out once again, and it almost proved to be their detriment, but thankfully he was able to create a few of his airstrike shields, covering both Koneko himself and Kiba from the acidic webbing-like attack of the spider devil. Once Kiba was able to refocus, they would quickly work together and take out the devil. Throwing it outside, both Akeno and Rias would finish it off in one swift motion of their attacks, as the fallen lightning and the crimson power of annihilation would seal the devil's fate, destroying it once and for all. With the battle now over, it seemed as though everything were fine, except for the fact that Rias would have to walk over and slap Kiba for his recklessness, asking him if something were bothering him. He would apologize before leaving hastily. Issei went to go check on him and make sure that he was alright, but Kiba would once again only apologize, telling him that he had other business that he needed to attend to, something that truly mattered to him at this moment, and that thing was his revenge. Issei tried to understand what revenge he was looking for, but Kiba wouldn't say very much, only the destruction of Excalibur. However, before he left, Issei would place his hand on his shoulder. It was only brief, but Kiba would only take it as a kind gesture, as he nodded and made his way into the night. However, unknown to Kiba, a small portal circle had been placed on him. That way, Issei could get to him in case anything happened. Issei wasn't the kind of person that wanted to let his friends go off all alone, but he understood that there were times when he needed to let them do their own things. All the same, this didn't stop him from doing something that at the very least could be beneficial. After all, you never know what type of trouble you might get into. As everyone went their separate ways for the night, as Kiba made his way out alone into the darkness, as it began to rain over the town itself, he would come across a priest that was looking for help. However, before he could learn anything else, the priest was struck down in cold blood. From out of the shadows, a familiar face would appear. The face of none other than the former priest turned rogue exorcist, Fried Selzen. And what's more, he had gotten his hands on something that Kiba absolutely despised. It was none other than a holy sword. In a fit of anger and rage, Kiba would summon his own sword, and the two would engage in a brief battle, Kiba trying to test the limits of the holy sword, to see if it was a true Excalibur. Once confirming so, he would kick the battle into the next level, using two of his absorbing swords at once, hoping to destroy it and Fried. However, Fried's sword proved to do quite a bit of damage. For Kiba, even being cut in the arm just one time was more than enough pain to drop him to one knee. However, he still persisted despite his injury, though before the fight could continue on any further, Fried would be summoned away at once. Whoever he was working for had decided to call him back, and Fried would laughingly mock at Kiba before disappearing into the cold night. In the meantime, Issei was home. He was dreaming once again, and he found himself having yet another one of those dreams. Although now, he would hear a different voice. A voice of someone whom he hadn't heard from in a while. It was Kuroi, the Black Dragon. Issei would listen very closely to what the dragon had to say. The dragon would warn him of the coming of the White One, of the Vanishing Dragon. Issei tried to understand what he meant by this, but however, Kuroi would simply remark that the Vanishing Dragon was one of the last 3 sky dragons, and with this dragon, it brought conflict. He merely told Issei to be on guard at all times, before fading away into the darkness, leaving Issei to awaken with the grimacing message. In the meantime, back at the Occult Research Club, once the cleaning had been done and they had made their way, they would notice that Kiba hadn't arrived yet, although for what reason they had no idea. This was when Rias would elaborate more on the holy swords, telling them of Kiba's past, of how he and many others were used in what was only known as the Holy Sword Project, a terrible experiment that resulted in much death and harm, all for the sake of finding those who were powerful enough to wield a holy sword. The original holy sword Excalibur had long since been broken into 7 pieces. However, using alchemy, the pieces themselves were reforged and converted into 7 unique holy swords. Even if they were just fragments of the original, they were still very powerful and dangerous and not to be taken lightly. In the meantime, Sona and Tsubaki would arrive not too long after, telling Rias and Akeno of an urgent meeting that the 4 needed to have privately. Seeing the seriousness, Rias would allow everyone to leave early and to go home, as she and Akeno would go on to discuss matters with the other head and servant of the House of Citri. During their meeting, they would learn of 2 members of the church, 2 members in particular who had been searching for Rias, and that they had planned to have their meeting tomorrow. While the meeting between the 4 heads were happening, Issei and Asuya would make their way back home. Issei would get the same feeling as he arrived closer to his house. The feeling that he had felt that night, the night he met Freed. Fearing the worst, Issei would quickly run inside of his home, yelling out to his mother, hoping that she was okay. Thankfully, she was fine. She was actually speaking to some company that she had had. As Issei and Asuya made their way in, they would see 2 young girls sitting on the couch across from their mother at the coffee table. One girl, who Issei had suddenly recognized, although believing she had been a boy based off of how she acted when they were children, she would reintroduce herself. It was Irina, and she had now made it back into town. Although why she was dressed up in the church-like getup, Issei had no idea. But there was also another girl. A girl with blue hair with green streaks, and she didn't seem as friendly. Irina would remark that it was really great to see Issei again, and how it felt as though it were fate that God would allow them to reconvene and have this reunion. Everything seemed all well and peaceful, and they eventually left. Rias would show up not too long after, terribly worried for her servants, as she had no idea what might have happened, and she promised to do a better job at looking after them, and to make sure of their safety at all times. Both Issei and Asuya would be grateful for Rias worrying about them, and they would assure her that everything were fine, and that the ones from the church didn't do anything except make conversation, before confirming that they were devils and leaving. This now left Rias wondering just who they were and what they wanted, and it wouldn't take long for her to find out, as the following afternoon, their meeting would commence. As the meeting came underway, the blue-haired girl would introduce herself as Zenobia and would explain their situation. She and Irina had been summoned by the church due to a certain incident. Of the 7 holy swords that had been created, only 6 could be accounted for, and of the 6 that remained, only 3 of them were still with the church, as the other 3 had been stolen by the fallen angels. Of the 3 that remained with the church, 2 of them were currently in their possession, both Irina and Zenobia respectively. For Zenobia, she carried the sword of destruction, and for Irina, the sword of mimic. At this meeting, Rias would ask them the purpose of them telling them this, and Zenobia would explain very bluntly that they merely wished to inform them so that they would stay out of the conflict, as this was between the church and the fallen angels, and they did not wish for the devils to get involved. Rias would smirk at this gumption, telling her that as a representative to the House of Grimmery, she would have no reason to get involved in such an affair. However, she would understand why someone would assume this. After all, the Holy Swords were very troublesome for devils as well, so it could have been to their benefit to at least attempt to help in covenanting them. However, Rias made it very clear that no one from her household would get involved in giving aid to either the fallen angels or to the church. With that understanding, Zenobia was preparing to leave when she cast a glance towards Asya, recognizing her as the young saint girl who had forsaken God and had become a devil. She had begun to make crude remarks towards Asya, referring to her as a witch and a heretic, and how she could do something so blasphemous as to give up the love for God and yet serve as a devil. This started to annoy Issei. To hear someone speaking down about Asya, someone that they didn't even know. They didn't know how kind she was, how nice and caring of a human being that she was. She never asked for any of this. She was just as much used by the church and the fallen angels, more so than by any of the devils for that matter, as the devils were the only one that tried to help her. However, Zenobia would continue on in her remarks, until eventually Issei had enough. You mind shutting up now? This has nothing to do with you, devil. I merely wish to speak to the witch girl. Quit calling her a witch. And what is she then? A girl who had the blessing of the god, and yet she forsook it all to become a devil. If she truly believes and wishes to be purified, then she can be purified by me. Be cut down and excised by me, Asya. Issei would stand in between them. Rias attempted to tell him to stop, but the room would shake suddenly. A flare of his cursed power would emit from himself. I see. The cursed black dragon. So it has fallen upon you. It is a shame. The shield was once looked at as a holy treasure, once held in high esteem by those of the church. But to see now that it has fallen into the hands of a devil, I shudder at the thought. You really should. I don't care who you are, and I don't care where you've come from. As far as I'm concerned, you, the church, and everything else in between can all go straight to hell. What was that? Rias would now stand more adamantly. She didn't want Issei to pick a fight, especially with these two, knowing the type of backlash that it could cause. But Issei was just getting started. Just what right do you have to speak down to anyone? Asya, all she ever wanted was to love God. He means more to her than anything. And yet when she was in trouble, in her time of need, where the hell were you? When the fallen angels were using her, when they attempted to kill her and take her powers, where were you then? Where was your precious God? Do you dare to speak blasphemy? I don't give a damn about your blasphemy. Answer me this. Asya wasn't saved by God. She was saved by the fallen angels. In her hour of need, when the fallen angels turned on her, she was saved by the devils. If anything, Asuya didn't rebuke God. God rebuked her. Through his own inaction, he showed just how much she means to him. So you don't have the right to talk down to her or to mock her. And if you so much as lay a finger on her, you will answer to me. So, is that it? You want to fight? If he does, then I want in. Everyone would look to the other side of the room to see that Kiba had arrived. I'm not really very much fond of holy swords. So if you're going to pick a fight with him, then you're going to be fighting me as well. The tension in the room had become palpable. Rias deciding that the best way to allow everyone to blow off their steam was to allow for a duel. A little small exhibition. Something that would be off the records. After all, if any of the higher-ups found out about this, then they'd all be in trouble. Before the fight would begin though, Rias would warn Issei not to use that power, as this was just an exhibition. Issei would nod in understanding. Before he walked over to Kiba, he would tell him to use his sword burst and to just create as many swords as possible. Kiba wasn't sure what Issei's plan was, but he figured if he were coming up with something, then it had to be useful. Kiba would nod and he would use sword burst, as multiple swords would pop up from out of the ground all at once. Using the promotion system, Issei, with permission from Rias, would promote himself to knight. Moving with quick speed, he would touch every single one of the swords that were on the ground, placing a small green seal on them, before telling Kiba to stay focused and to cut loose. Kiba nodded without hesitating. Picking up one of his swords, he would go charging straight towards Zenobia. In the meanwhile, Issei didn't have any grudge against Irina respectively, so there wasn't really animosity in their fight. And in fact, things were going well for the most part. That was until Issei's perversions kicked into action. Issei decided that now was a good time to try out the slime shield and its abilities. Although, why on earth he would use the slime shield, no one really knew. But Kaneko sighed as she knew fully well what Issei intended to do with that shield. The shield that was the bane of every woman's existence. Issei would point the shield directly towards Irina, as a green tendril would lash out. Irina would use her sword, Mimic, and the sword would stretch and move, similar to the tendril. The two long-like attacks colliding with one another, and it seemed as though they had gotten wrapped up together before eventually breaking away. Irina wondered why he would use something like a slime shield. She had heard about slimes, and they really weren't good for much of anything except... not that. Anything but that. She began to pray and hope that Issei would be forgiven for his perversions. To think that he had such an amazing power like the shield, and yet he used it for such trivial things. This must have been a test from God. Issei in the meantime only had one thing on his mind, and that was getting her out of those skivvies, and he was going to do so one way or another. He started to chase after Irina relentlessly, and Irina had no choice but to bash him on the head with the hilt of her sword. However, as she did so, since Issei was using the slime shield, the properties of the slime were also a part of Issei's body. That hit on the head sent his head flying, but it didn't fall off his neck. His neck simply went elastic, slamming all the way into the ground before ricocheting back up to his shoulders. Irina was also surprised to see that his whole body was like a slime, all slippery and moving and almost as if it were something akin to rubber. Issei would simply outstretch his hand, hoping that if he could just touch her, then he could then get what he wanted. This would start the relentless game of cat and mouse as Issei continued to chase after Irina over and over again. Irina eventually deciding that enough was enough, she would try to go in for a quick strike. However, Issei would use the shield at the last moment to block her sword. And as he did so, her sword would be swallowed by the slime shield itself. Irina would eventually be able to kick and pull away. However, Issei, taking a piece of the slime, would shoot it directly towards her as it hit her in the thigh. As it did so, her clothes started to melt extremely fast. Issei jumping up and down in victory as it seemed as though he had gotten what he wanted. A peep. And for Irina, well, this was a step over the line. And now, not deciding to hold back anymore, she would deliver a flurry of strikes towards Issei. Issei using every part of his ability to duck and dodge, although he would get slashed in the chest 3 times. The pain from the cuts themselves of the holy sword was more than enough to make him fall to his knees in anguish. As they looked over, they would see Kiba fighting with Zenobia. Her sword of destruction was more than capable of holding its own against Kiba over and over again, and Kiba was running out of swords quickly. Although, there was one trick up his sleeve, one that Issei was going to provide. Issei would then get up using the last of his strength. He would summon the portal shield. For every sword that Kiba held, whenever Zenobia would go in for a strike, Issei would use the portal shield spell to transport Kiba to another sword on the field, allowing him to just barely evade the attacks over and over again. With Kiba and his already insane level of speed, he was able to move around lightning quick, getting behind Zenobia at the last moment. The two of them would go for a simultaneous strike at the same time, a large explosion occurring in the process. While Zenobia took some damage, as she had been not guarding her blind spot, Kiba, however, took the brunt of it as well. Everyone for the most part felt as though the fight was coming to an end, and Rias decided that they should just call it a draw for now. Although for Zenobia, she would remark that something like cheap tricks wasn't going to be enough to defeat her. As she looked around, most of the swords had already been destroyed except for a few, meaning that that trick was about to run its course anyway. Of course, Kiba wanted to keep going, but he knew better. As they were preparing to leave though, Kiba would give them some useful information, telling them of the priest that they had sent ahead of time to check things out. Well, he had been killed, and the one who had done it was Fried Selzen, as he too had gotten his hands on an Excalibur. Grateful for the information, they would exchange and give some to them as well, that the fallen angel that they were after was a fallen angel general, Kokobile. At the very mention of that name, Rias would begin to sweat. If Kokobile was really behind this, then this was definitely a more troublesome situation. And even off to the side, Akeno, she felt a bit nervous as well. As they were leaving, Kiba would prepare to leave as well, as he too wanted to go and hunt for Excalibur. Although Rias would attempt to stop him, as a member of her house, she didn't want them getting involved. However, Kiba had already made up his mind, and he had no intentions on turning back. Rias would again try to command him to stay, that as a member of her house, he couldn't just act so recklessly on his own. However, with a hardened heart, Kiba would renounce his membership to the House of Gremory, and that he would rather go out on his own if it meant that he could get his revenge. The others only watched on as Kiba would leave them, unsure of what to do in this moment. For Issei, he knew that he couldn't just let Kiba try to go out on his own. Especially if he had really left, he might be seen as a stray devil and there was no telling what would come after him next. But he knew he needed help. Thankfully, there was one loudmouth devil at his school who he could strong-arm into being on his side. At first, he'd met him. It was seen as just a simple outing to get lunch, but that was far from the case, as Sanji of the House of Sea Tree would soon learn. But not only Issei, but Koneko as well. They were both immensely worried for Kiba's safety. But how were they going to be able to find him? Issei already had that covered. Unknowingly to Kiba, he had actually placed a portal seal on him, so they could find him rather quickly. But in the meantime, they also needed to find those other two church girls, although where they were, no one could really tell. As the three walked down the street, not thinking that they would run into him, that's exactly what they did. They were on the corner of the streets, begging for money. Apparently, Irina had spent everything that they had as traveling funds on a painting, and well, they had nothing for food. Issei would help them out with that, although they had mixed feelings about taking help from a devil of all people. Irina tried to offer some comfort and support, asking for God to bless them, but it only ended up giving the three other devils massive headaches, and they had to pronounce that they didn't need the help. Although, now that everything seemed to be on good footing, Zenobia would ask them why they had offered them this kindness, and Issei would remark that they had a similar goal in mind. After all, they had made it very clear that the holy swords couldn't fall into the wrong hands, and that they would rather them be destroyed than to be used for the fallen angel's own purposes. Well, if destroying them, at the very least, would allow them to accomplish their goal, then why not work together? Zenobia would think this over, and allowing them to go after one wouldn't be so bad. Irina would warn her that they were getting into something rather dangerous to agree to this. But what other choice did they have? They were dealing with the likes of Kokobile, and who knows how many others who were involved. They could use all of the help that they could get. And they already understood the mission long before now, while retrieving back the holy swords was definitely on their parameter. If they couldn't be retrieved, destruction was the next option. With everyone in agreement, Issei would then teleport them to wherever Kiba was, and thankfully it wasn't anywhere too far. Kiba was on his guard, as he still didn't trust the others. But to see that Issei and Koneko were there, and even Saji, well, now he at least had to listen to what they had to say. Issei would tell Kiba of their plan, and Kiba at first thought it was rather stupid, the idea of them actually working together. But at the same time, this could get him closer to his goal. Zenobia would agree, and she even offered apologies for what had happened to him, to be a part of the Holy Sword Project. The unspeakable tortures that had been committed, they were looked upon with disdain by the members of the church to this day, and the ones responsible were excommunicated. The leader behind the research, Galilei Valper, or otherwise known as the Archpriest of Annihilation, although Kiba was all too familiar with who Galilei was. But all the same, he still held everyone a part of the church as responsible. Similar to Issei's feelings, it was under their watch that such atrocities occurred, and now, rather than taking responsibility, they merely wished to wipe it from existence as if it never happened. But now there was no time to dwell on that. The only thing they had to focus on now was getting the holy swords and destroying them once and for all. Once they were all in agreement, the meeting spot would be arranged. As nightfall came over the city, Issei was preparing to head out, under the guise of going to meet with his regular client. Asuya would wish him good luck, and he turned back towards her, seeing her kind and warm smile, and then thinking of the possibilities of something coming along and destroying it all. That was one thing he was not going to allow to happen, not if he had anything to say about it. He turned back and assured her that everything was going to be fine as he left, going off to meet with the others, as the hunt for the holy swords would begin. This concludes What If Issei Was a Shield Hero? Highschool DxD, Season 2, Part 1, Dragon's Rage. As always, if you enjoyed today's video and everything else that we have on PowerCore Productions and Podcastings, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcastings that is to come out now and in the future. Stay tuned for tomorrow's video as we are going to be continuing What If Naruto Was the Avatar? Naruto Rebirth Shippuden Part 4. But anyway, that's going to do it for the end of today's video. I'm Javon Harrington with PowerCore Productions and Podcastings. Signing off, and I'll see you next time.